Welcome everyone to Dreaming Trans Futures with Lucie Fielding and Avgi Saketopoulou. My name is Greg Newton. I'm the co-founder of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, along with my partner, Donnie Jokum. And tonight we are being helped out by Sam Karagulin, second time, one of our lovely volunteers. The Bureau is an independent, all-volunteer queer bookstore that Donnie and I founded back in 2012, and that has been here at the LGBT Community Center since 2014. And as an all-volunteer independent queer bookstore, we rely on both sales and donations to keep this machinery going. So I'm going to pass a bag around. If you're able to donate, great. We also are happy to take your support by buying books like Trans Sex, which is for sale tonight. But I'll pass the bag around. You'll also see QR codes for our Fractured Atlas site if you want to make a tax-deductible donation, or Venmo. You can do that, those of you online, at BGSQD. So I'll pass that around. Thank you. And if you're not already on our email list and you'd like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room or on our website, bgsqd.com, and you'll get an email every other Monday about our many upcoming events. We have regular hours Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. and then we often stay open later when we have events such as this. So before I introduce Lucie and Avgi, I want to make a land acknowledgement. The Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And the Bureau also recognizes Palestinian liberation as a fundamental part of our collective queer liberation, and we strongly encourage you to take one of our free zines about why we feel it's important, especially for queer people, to speak out in solidarity with Palestinians. So please take one of those when you're checking out the books and pass them around, share them widely. So, let me introduce our guests. Lucie Fielding is a therapist, a sex and kink educator, and the author of the book Trans Sex, Nurturing Trans Erotic Embodiment and Gender Pleasure, which we're now celebrating the second edition of. The first edition of Trans Sex, Clinical Approaches to Trans Sexualities and Erotic Embodiments, was shortlisted for a 2022 Lambda Literary Award in the Transgender Nonfiction category, and was awarded the 2022 AASECT Book Award, Book for Sexuality Professionals, the 2024 SSTAR, lots of acronyms, Health Professionals Book Award, and the 2024 APA Division 44 Distinguished Book Award. I'm sure we all know what the APA Division 44 is. Avgi Saketopoulou is an immigrant from Cyprus and Greece and a practicing psychoanalyst. She teaches at the NYU postdoctoral program in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. Her published work centers on issues of queer desire, consent, and is committed to renewing sadism as an ethical and political intervention. She is the author of, that's fun, I get to read the greatest bios here. I'm so lucky. She is the author of Sexuality Beyond Consent, Risk, Race, Traumatophilia, and the co-author with Anne Pellegrini of Gender Without Identity. In 2025, she co-founded P-Hole, Psychoanalytic Hub for Online Liberatory Education. It just gets better. A pro-trans, pro-queer, pro-Palestine, anti-racist learning group committed to decolonial practices and to disability and economic justice. Her next book project is provisionally titled Sadism's Offer, Aesthetics and the Revolutionary Impulse, which I hope you will launch here after you. Always happy to have you back. Please give them a very warm welcome.
here we go.
Yeah.
Just gonna move this closer. Thank you all for being here with us tonight. I'm super excited for this. Lucy and I have been counting down and texting each other. Here we go, here we go. So here we are. The way this is gonna go tonight is, what we've decided is I'll ask Lucy a few questions about her book. She'll answer, we'll get into some conversation, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Lucy, why a second edition?
Well, my press approached me and said, you know, we would like for you to do a second edition. And they said, you know, like, well, usually a second edition will have like 30% will be different, new. And I said, well, what if it were 80% new? Because I learn and I think and I write very iteratively. I was speaking this morning for a podcast, Ordinary Unhappiness, about Freud's 3 essays. And, you know, and part of that was just how many times Freud reworks the 3 essays and just like over and over and over again and adding yet another huge footnote. We love footnotes. And I think iteratively like that. And I'm always like, I always want to think about things provisionally. There's this quote that I really love from a short story by Anam Sufi, Undone, and she writes, "Hold me like you would a photograph from the edges and lightly." And I love this idea of like, what if we held the concepts, the modalities, the metaphors, the metaphorical systems that we have from this place of from the edges and lightly, that we're not like, it's not solidifying, it's not becoming manualized to the point that it's always in flux, always fluid, always in transition. And so there were just like things that I wanted to make clearer. There were things that I realized just didn't work in the first edition, or that I was thinking very differently about. You know, one of those was like safety, and I assume we'll get into that. And it was really important for me too, to really incorporate, I love these kinds of events. I love teaching. Teaching is, as Spock would say, my first best destiny. And there are a lot of Star Trek references in the book. Apologies. And I thrive on teaching as a learning space as well, where I am constantly trying to like be responsive to what I'm hearing and what I'm and I really love that. I want, like tonight, like everything that we're talking about and all the questions like will have me thinking differently about the next thing, and you know, and so I'm really excited about that.
I really love that answer, because 80% different could be like a new book, and many people would opt for a new book. But I think that there's something fascinating about not just the iterative aspect of what you're talking about, but to me, it makes me think very much about how you speak about solidarity, which we'll get into for sure. But also this quality of being willing to revise one's earlier ideas, which is something that especially in queer spaces we're too anxious to do. The fear is that we put something down. Once we put it down, since we are so much under attack, then we have to double down and try to protect it at all costs. So there's a particular ethic in the willingness to say, you know what, I don't agree with some things that I said just like 5 years ago.
Yeah, I wanna say it better, I want more people to be heard and seen. My friend Raj Kuhn, talks about, he's a two-spirit sex therapist in the Bay Area. And, he talks about, like, I just want a sledgehammer, like, you let me in the door and then I just sledgehammer it open on the way out. And so it's, my task, I feel, is like starting a conversation that I know I cannot possibly end. I don't wanna have the last word. Not anywhere close to it. Because the work always, somebody will read the book and say like, God, I wish she had done something more here. This doesn't quite work, or like, this is problematic, and I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a way to think about knowledge production as evolving always through time and not getting solidified. And the notion of the sledgehammer makes me think of the anxiety around inclusion. And the idea is not just to get in, but to get in and Trojan horse your way into kind of like destroying something from within. So this sledgehammer also speaks to the importance of aggression, which we'll talk about. So let me, there's two sets of things that we have talked about focusing on today. The book is really amazing. I read it, I was very, very honored to have been asked to blurb it. And I have to tell you, there's not a single cliche in this book. And this is really amazing and refreshing for a book that is writing about marginality in so many different ways and is so interested in the margins, the non-normative, in what happens when we begin to think outside of established discourses. So I wanted to ask you about, will you tell us about gender pleasure?
So, gender pleasure, I always want to cite my sources, and it was originally, in the first edition, there was a piece by Tuck Malloy, who's a sex educator and I believe training to be a sex therapist now. And they wrote about a gender pleasure history. And it was this great exercise, and when it came to titling that chapter, that piece, I was like, well, what about gender pleasure? That sounds really great. And they were okay with it, but like, as I kind of, again, move through conversations, move through classes and workshops, I realized like I kept coming back to that, and I wanted to really fully tease it out and develop it. And I see it as, in many ways, an alternative to gender euphoria. We have a lot of terms. We have trans joy, we have gender good, and of course gender euphoria, which is perhaps the most ubiquitous. And I'm not gonna be somebody who is like, well, say this, don't say this, like if a client or a friend is like describing their experience in terms of gender euphoria, I'm not going to stop them, or by all means, but my friends in the narrative therapy community would say like, the words and the metaphors and the stories that we use bring forth realities. And I think about that so often. Like, what am I whispering into existence? What am I calling into the room with me, into what some psychoanalysts call the analytic field. What's there? What's surrounding us? And so my problem with gender euphoria is like threefold. It's one, I think it's too clinical. It's like dysphoria, it's part of a mental stats exam, like you're oriented by 4, you're euphoric mood state, but flat affect and, and presentation, all these kind of things. And I really didn't want that reality called in, especially because so often trans experiencing has been characterized by, defined by, tried to be made legible by clinicians and captured within what Foucault calls the gaz médical, the clinical gaze. And so that's my first problem with it. The second problem is that I just think it sounds too rarefied. Like euphoria, I think, it's like, it sounds like it needs to be a peak experience. Like, the heavens are parting, choirs of angels, shafts of light, singing to the music of the spheres, which, sounds great. And like, I've had experiences like that in my body. And as I've moved through the world, but like, those are pretty rare. And I wanted to think about like, what are the everyday ho-hum banal experiences we have of just like sometimes feeling just okay or meh in our bodies, or just, so it doesn't have to be this big huge thing that we have to aspire to, and that we might feel like, oh, I've never felt a euphoric experience in my body, what's wrong with me? So gender pleasure I define as the pleasure that we experience in and with gender or agender, whether that's, and there's three components to it. The first is an idea of like, this is relevant to my gender. And I think about Emily Nagoski's work, Come As You Are, where she talks about sexually relevant contexts. And, so like, what are the things that are relevant to my gender, to how I do gender? And it's not, I'm not trying to say like, like all femmes, experience gender pleasure through this kind of presentation or this kind of, it's not some statement about femininity or womanhood or femme. It's simply just like how I do it. It's like, I love wearing corsets. I'm not saying everyone should wear corsets and feel gender pleasure. Very few people do. I do, and I love the way that it makes the way that I move, the way that it draws attention to my bosom, the way that it forces me to walk. I like the constriction too. The other elements are like feeling affirmed in one's, in sensual, social, and erotic play experiences. So I think it goes so far beyond identity and pronouns, and it's about the energies and intentions that are being brought to our bodies. Because when I think about like how dysphoria lives in me, it's not so much about a particular part, although for some people it is. Body dysphoria can be a thing. But it's also for me about like, how is my body being approached and understood and read, and is this something, I use this word a lot, yummy. So is it that somebody is approaching my body from a place of, I don't know what this is, but I'm really excited to write an erotic lexicon with you? Or is it from a place of, I've seen that genital configuration before, there's this thing that I do with my tongue, I'm just gonna do that, because that's what I do when I encounter this genital configuration. And then the last is like the kind of grab bag part. It's, just feeling yummy in your body in a given moment, And I think that kind of pushes against a kind of body positivity angle where, it's like I'm not asking you with gender pleasure to love your body all the time or even most of the time. It's really about those small little moments where like Prince's Erotic City is on and my hips are just moving and just like it's like I'm feeling really good about that. And that is like, there's something about the way that my hips are moving that's gender pleasurable for me. So I really want it to be that kind of grab bag. I think about, and I write about this in the book, there's a moment with a client I'll never forget. They had been on low dose tea for like 6 months, and I checked in with them and I was like, so hey, like how's it going? And they said, Lucie, I feel nothing. And first I have no poker face, like, my clients know this about me, and so like, oh no, it's not a lack. It's not something that's wrong. It's that I'm not devoting any energy to thinking about gender in this moment. To use another Star Trek metaphor, it's like you're taking the energy from the shields into the holodeck, so you actually get to be having fun, being in the world, just being in the world without having to think about it. And I love that that can be gender pleasurable as well. It doesn't have to be something magical and a peak experience.
I think that at the time that like either affirmative or defensive approaches to bodies overall and to transness in particular have so much anxiety about sexuality. Like either the complete desexualization of the trans body because of the fear of sexualizing it, or the fetishization of it and the preoccupation of people with genitals, with like the inappropriate range of questions that come up in kind of like non-personal relationships. I think that injecting pleasure into putting it side by side with the notion of gender, when we have so, both discursively and in our everyday lives, parsed apart gender from sexuality. I mean, how many times is it not repeated to us that gender is one thing and sexuality is another thing? And to put them in contact with each other and to begin to kind of like create that friction, and friction is also like the free zone of sexual excitement, like that seems like a really important insistence on not having gender just be about recognition.
Yeah, I don't like being legible. I don't like it when somebody tries to soften my edges. I like to be sharp. I like to be in your face. I really love that. And and I really want to fight for that, and for that ability to then invite in uncertainty and ambiguity and ambivalence. Like
this is amazing because it's so counter to the way that people are told they have to think about transness. And you're citing also in your book, you're citing Trapdoor and the work that Tourmaline and Eric Stanley have done around the problem of hypervisibility, which also takes this to the political domain. Like, what does it mean for bodies to be cataloged and to be visibilized and to be taken into the neoliberal regime such that they become more subject to surveillance, more subject to regulation. And this is the thread in your book that I think is really amazing, how much you travel between the personal, the therapeutic, the sexual in dyads or triads or whatever, orgies, and then out to the social world. So one of the things that I wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit about is why pleasure now at a time that there is so much backlash against all minoritarian experience, but trans people in particular? What does it mean to be insisting on talking about pleasure rather than rights, rather than identification.
Yeah, and I really want to be fighting for not a pleasure as in like, you know, it's become common now to talk about like pleasure is liberatory, you know, and by that it means like, yeah, it just kind of fits into that neoliberal wellness industrial complex, you know,
And
whatever.
therapeutic complex,
And
right?
therapeutic, you know, and so I always wanted to have teeth. I wanted to have, I really want to be careful that it's not about, you know, diverting one's attention and gaze from what is going on in the world. You know, like we need to be paying attention. We need to be seeing what's going on and being responsive to it. But I also don't want us to be like, you know, that scene from Clockwork Orange where they're, you know, like opening the eyes, you know, and it's like, I don't want it to be like that either, because I do think that, and, you know, folks like Tricia Hersey, the Nat Ministry, Emily and Amelia Nagoski and Burnout, talking about rest, talk about how, like, you know, the folks who benefit from majoritarian belonging, dominant groups, especially like, you know, figures in power, want us to be exhausted and evacuated of joy. You know, the thing Steve Bannon says is, you know, like flood the zone, right? And so it's like, it's meant to just like keep us constantly like, I will not rest until X is done. And I think like pleasure is something to be part of that for not only the sustaining of the movement, but because I don't want us to just survive transphobia. I want us to thrive beyond it. I want, you know, I see pleasure as utopic in the way that like Jose Esteban Munoz in Cruising Utopia sees it sees queerness and queer time as reaching for something that is, or Tourmaline writes about like freedom dreaming, and it's this gorgeous essay from July 2020. And, you know, and that's even so much in how she reads Marsha P. Johnson in her wonderful book, which I see on the shelf over there. Go get it. And it's, I love that insistence on the world of softness and abundance is always already here. And also, it's worth fighting for. And so I think what distinguishes a pleasure as liberatory and a wellness mode is that there has to be a praxis behind it. Like, what are you doing, and how is this fitting in within a relationship, within dynamic?
Yeah. This is the ethical dimension, which is not just about the pleasure of I want my pleasure, or I want my pleasure for me and my partner or my partners. It actually radiates out to the larger world. And when you're speaking about wanting something with teeth, it is a refusal. And this is what I find so powerful about Lucie's work. It is a refusal to allow pleasure to be oriented only in contrast, only in reactive relation to the medicalized model, or to the ways in which power wants us to arrange ourselves, and to say, you want this, we're going to do the other thing, but to actually step out of that dialectic completely and do something else entirely, which I think is is a different form of resistance and a different form of survival that is about thriving and not just living. Which I think in some ways brings us to the question of solidarity, because you do some really interesting work in reconfiguring how we may think of solidarity as, like you put it in a different context. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I do want to, note that solidarity is having a moment. There's Sarah Schulman's new book on solidarity. There have been a number of pieces that have been, turning to that. There's, even within some anti-Zionist Jewish spaces, thinking about solidarity. It said safety through security. It's like safety through solidarity. I really want to talk about it erotically, and not just sexually, but erotically, and here I want to just note my indebtedness to Oliver Davis and Tim Dean's Hatred of Sex, and the ways that they really caution us that oftentimes when we want to be polite and talk about sex or pleasure, we talk about the erotic, and that's not the erotic that I'm trying to conjure here. I'm trying to conjure an erotic that is destabilizing, that's unsettling, that's disturbing, that's dangerous, and that is a species of the sublime, and so solidarity is, it emerges from a larger kind of critique that I've had about safety, and the reliance, particularly, trauma therapists are the worst about this, about we have to establish a feeling of safety before we can do anything, before we can process trauma, before we can do anything hard, before we can dive deep into anything.
Can I ask you if you would share, you share in the book an experience that you had with a therapist. Do you want to say a little bit about that? I think it's a really good example of how you move us out of that model.
Yeah, so I was doing some work with a therapist a few years ago, and we were doing some parts work and some bilateral stimulations, EMDR work, and some stuff just kept coming up, and I just I'd been reading your book, Sexuality Beyond Consent, and I was thinking a lot about risk, because she would continually tell me we've got to establish a feeling of safety in your system before we can do any of this work. And I kept saying no, we really don't. It's amazing to me how, again, to think about tightly holding things, how tightly held safety is for, in particular, trauma therapists. And that it's we have to, how do we think outside of safety? And my therapist at the time said, I don't know how I can help you if we can't establish this feeling of safety in your system. I was well, good luck, because, it's safety is not something to which I have access or have ever had access. And have you looked around at what's happening? This is not exactly, a safe place, and so but she was really disturbed by this, and it ended up that our therapeutic relationship ended after that kind of blow up because, you know, she was activated, I was activated, and I have a lot of understanding for this, you know, that like, I know how she was trained because I was trained that way.
All of us are trained that way.
Yeah, you know, like all these things that we just take as givens, you know, like you're, that the last few years should have given light to, like things like you don't process trauma while it's actively going on. You don't process trauma when you're both feeling it, client and therapist. Like, good luck in the pandemic, you know, for example. And so like I really understand that. And also I want to move beyond that because, and I've always wanted to think about like, what is it that allows us to do hard things? What allows us to, and this is where I draw so much from your work is that like what are the preconditions that allow us to turn towards risk, towards things that terrify us? Because anything that touches the unconscious has got to terrify us if because it's impossible to know what's in there. And so solidarity, again, this all comes from conversations. Conversations with you, conversations with my dear friend Empress Wu, conversations with Kai-Cheng Tom. In particular, Kai-Cheng Tom and I were talking, you know, and I was like, oh God, you know, like I keep having this concept from the first edition and I just don't think it works because, again, to bring up Davis and Dean's hatred of sex, like it just kept trying to circumscribe and limit the erotic and like sanitize it. And I really didn't want that. So it's like, what is the feeling that we are going for? We want safety to do all these things. We want it to bring us into a relationship. We want it to allow us to take risks, but it doesn't actually do that because safety is so allied with comfort and stability. And as you put it, you know, in so brilliantly in Sexuality Beyond Consent, it's about maintenance of the status quo. It's about mastery. And you know, the ego, you know, holding on to what it knows and only what it knows, and resisting the foreign. And so I think about like another way of thinking about it is complicity. You know, what I wanted from my therapist, to go back to that, was I wanted her to be risking as much as she was asking me to risk. And I wanted to feel that from her. And that was not a place she was willing to go. And so solidarity is that feeling. And I think I don't want it to be calling upon this kind of tradition of solidarity being a speech act, of simply like, you know, the example I give is from like Monty Python and the Life of Brian, you know, solidarity brother, solidarity Reg, you know, and it's like
Nothing
just
happens.
nothing happens. Nothing, there's no risking, there's no giving up something. Because I think that when we're doing hard things, we do have to, as I was talking to Wu the other day, it's like, you have to engage in a Faustian bargain almost, of like, there's something that you are going to have to give up or risk giving up. And solidarity, what I love about it is that it's inherently relational. Safety is in many ways inherently individualistic. It's about safety from something. And so often we're talking about like the priority prioritizing someone's safety over another person's safety, another group's safety, another community's safety. Whereas solidarity, it's always solidarity with something, someone. And so I really wanted to call upon that. I also really wanted to call upon the explicitly political piece and the overturning of the status quo, and the engagement of like constantly being in movement, and putting oneself on the line.
I want to draw out a couple of things that are in the book and that you're beginning to say, which I think could get lost because solidarity is such a big thing these days. Because when you were pointing out earlier with this moment where you tell your therapist, have you looked outside? Like, does the world look safe to you? Because if it does, like, that's our problem, right? Like this idea that the notion of safety is always already gendered and racialized and like it runs through class. This idea requires us, if we're going to rethink sexuality as also involving the disturbing and the unsettling and the demonic, then we will need a different set of tools with which to think everything else around sexuality. We don't just get to enlarge that domain and then keep everything else. And one of the things that you're doing with solidarity that I think is really fascinating is you're not just talking about being in solidarity with the other person who is suffering or with the other, not just being present with another, but also being present with what's unexpected in each other and what we find that we couldn't see coming, which is a very different way of thinking about the contractual obligation that consent and all of its fake promises. I love like Blunt, Mistress Blunt says consent is a scam, and I just love that line. Because it scams us, not just into trusting that there is such a thing as fully entering something safely. It, more than that, consigns us into the fantasy that such a thing is possible, if not with you, maybe with somebody else, but it's achievable. And part of what you're asking us to do is to give up altogether that in favor of entering something with another that is impossible to calculate in advance. And that is a very different way of thinking about solidarity rather than the I am in solidarity with you over X. Right?
And I think about, I'm a kinky femme, and I think so often about like what are the ways of relating, being in dynamic, being in scene that I really yearn for, that I daydream about, that I write in my scene journal about. And it's always about these like where things could go horribly wrong. Like I always, whenever I teach about like solidarity or an allied expression, mutual entanglement, I always want to say like this class could go horribly wrong. It will go off the rails. I can't guarantee anything. But there's a possibility of emergence, something unexpected, something that might surprise and delight us. I think of so often about like, kind of bring the ego back in, it's like the ego's so good at cloaking things that it doesn't understand in scary images and to kind of wave us off from them, from pursuing them. And I think about, well, what about like if I am with someone in solidarity, and I feel that, like, I say to Wu, I don't.
I love that line. It's like,
I
take
don't
out
feel
your
safe with
notebooks.
you. Yeah, I don't feel safe with you, but I trust you. And there are a couple of people that I relate that way with. Like, I trust them, but like I don't at all feel safe.
I mean, this is a different, like you're talking about the safety axiom, which you were describing before without using the term, but it's a shortcut that you're introducing to talk about like the prioritization of safety. And the I don't feel safe with you, but I trust you calls for a different way of thinking about what can happen between two people. That it's not necessarily about having a good experience or a safe experience, but sticking around for the aftermath of what happened. And at a time that so many people are giving up on each other, when the other person gets something wrong, like those of us who work with couples see that also in a very concrete way. But we also see it in queer, I think in kink communities, this is a particularly sore spot for me. Kind of like how hard it is to stick around for the disaster and to stick around for somebody fucking up. And how hard that makes it for somebody to be able to take responsibility for fucking up without it then becoming a collapsing moment of everything has now been destroyed and that person is only bad. Like, I think it also opens up the space for rethinking questions of responsibility.
Moves us beyond the carceral, moves us beyond.
Very abolitionist.
Yeah, and it also takes us out of, like, we can't afford to dispose of anyone right now. I mean, I think about client, who said something shitty on the internet once, and like genuinely shitty on the internet, but like, but like we work together, about like, okay, like this person in their community got like totally, thrown out, and meanwhile I was like, I can work with them and I can make, they can be like the best accomplice ever after, like we've been, like this is a person I want to walk down the street with after, after this work. Like I really want to resist that and that fucking up is just going to happen and we can't rush to like make things clean.
As clinicians, it's I think somewhat easier to have the space for that because we are on our patient's side, so to speak. But I'm thinking of how much harder that becomes when somebody fucks up with us, right? And how pleasurable the feeling of grievance can be, and how hard it can be to give up the sense of, I am the person who has been aggrieved, and I am the person who has been harmed, and how easily that can map onto earlier trauma that one might have. And then it's like bingo, like it becomes so recalcitrant and so impossible to move through. So what you were saying earlier about how somebody who moves through such a sequence can actually become the best accomplice, much more trustworthy than somebody who starts with good politics but who has never taken the risk and who has never fucked up, because now their politics come through their own self-transformation as opposed to having started out with good politics. I'm not saying that starting out with good politics is a bad thing. I'm just saying that it's not tested. And there's something about it being tested. So what you said, I think, is like really fascinating from that perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you. But this brings up the question of how do we disarm ourselves such that when somebody fucks up, we are not meeting them with that kind of reactivity, or when somebody invites us into that space, like how, because we're talking about how we are all coming in with our defenses, with our resistances into every encounter, and you have a lot to say and to guide us through how one might put some of their weapons down.
Or, like I talk about how we go into so many, if not all, like I go into every new experience with a partner from a place of like, where I feel armored, I feel the defense. Because I live in the world. I know, you know, like about I've experienced things personally. I'm aware of like discursive currents, you know, around, you know, that go back to you know, exclusionary politics from the 70s, you know, and you know, but like it's and so it's how can we, when we are relating to one another, come into that relationship. So solidarity is the kind of the goal feeling for that. And what some providers call de-armoring, and I'm thinking in particular about somatic sex educators and sexological body workers, that's the practice that one engages in order to nurture that feeling of solidarity that allows the defense to soften and thus to become open to a new experience. And so de-armoring, it's not about someone else from without removing the armor. And nor is it this active thing where you are removing your own armor. Like so many clients, come to me with this like idea of like the similar story of like, I'm in the midst of a play experience and suddenly like a wall shoots up and like cuts me off, you know, basically at the neck. And, and it's like, they try to fight against it, you know, and like tear the armor from them. And that never works. The defense will just redouble its efforts. And so instead it's like, what if you're approaching it from this place of, I'm just going to honor the presence of this defense. I'm going to be complicit with the defense instead of trying to fight against it. That the body itself, the embodied psyche, will soften of its own accord. And the analogy I give is the
I was gonna
anus.
ask you, yes,
Yeah.
tell us about the asshole.
Yeah, I love talking about the asshole. So, you know, for those of us who love our assholes, you know, there are two sphincters. They're part of the anus. There's the exterior sphincter that is largely under our control, you know, and then there's just a little bit inside is the interior, and that is unconscious. That is something that we don't really have any control of. And, you know, so how do you prep for that? Well, it's a lot of lube. It's a lot of techniques of just like slowing things down and approaching from this place that allows the sphincter to soften of its own accord, and it will open, like, you know, with certain kinds of stimulation. Wu tells this story about fisting, anal fisting, and she says, you know, like, I hope I get this right, where she's like, yeah, like I'm like, what I do is I will be fisting someone and I'll just like, I'll just rest with my fist, like just the first knuckle, and I'll just wait. And I'm really patient. I will just wait until that sphincter opens up, and then when it does, then I can continue and I can move forward with the fisting, you know, and I really think about that, about like various kinds of warm up, various kinds of like, I mean, even dirty talk or affirmation, you know, can be a way of de-armoring. You know, it's like, yeah, to absolutely tell me that I'm gorgeous, tell me that I am, you know, that I'm a good little slut, you know, like all of these things, you know, help me then soften. And then that, because I am feeling somebody being in solidarity with me, and I'm feeling that somatically, and not just because they're telling me that they are.
I mean, whose patience, like when they say, I can wait. Like
Yeah.
for me, like that's a version of like what solidarity can look like. I'm not in a rush, this is not on my timing. This will just happen. And it will happen because we'll both be here, and it will take however long it takes.
Yeah.
And there's something about that kind of, it's a form of participation that is not about imposing one's will. Neither is it an exercise of the will for the bottom
Yeah.
to just like the way you command your hand to move. That's not the organ through which this happens.
Yeah.
How are we doing on time?
It's 8:07.
8:07. Should we open it up, like, or how would you like?
Do you have a final?
I have like two things that I wanna say quickly and then maybe ask you and then you can answer and
Yeah.
then we see what the audience
Yeah.
has to say.
I'd love
I
that.
was wondering, like, you offer a really important intervention in learning how to receive no's, which I think is really important, if you can say something about that. And also, are there possible misreadings of the kinds of things that you offer us that you would want to caveat or like flag for us ahead of time?
Yeah, so I think about how powerful it is to be able to give a no and to feel that no being honored. That's softening, that's de-armoring. And I also think about how like the act of sometimes like especially like for tops, like we want to hear a no. We want to hear a lot of no's, in fact, because the no gives force and meaning to the yes. And so I think about how like if we in relating are hearing that no, it's like, okay, yeah, now I can begin to trust that, you know, you are going to advocate, that you're taking responsibility for your needs, that you're not asking me to mind read. When I'm screw up the courage to say a no and somebody says thank you for that no, or like, you know, I'm really having a pain flare today, I can't hold this stress position, or like I'm experiencing dysphoria with this thing, can we just like do something else? And then somebody's like, yeah, who cares, like it's about the pleasure, it's not about it's not about doing a particular thing, you know, we don't have an agenda here. It's just like, okay, great, let's move on to something else that would be fun for us both. And so I love a no. I love receiving it, I love giving it. Misreadings.
I'm asking because your book has so many daring things that it says that are outside our usual discourse.
Yeah. And I think it's that danger that all of us who publish work, you know, engage in, which is like, you know, once it's out there, people are going to cite it and quote it and take things, and you have no control over how they're going to do it. And sometimes, like with the first edition, I found all sorts of moments where it was like, wow, you just made me say the exact opposite of what I meant. You know, this was about like, I talk about discourses of function and, you know, and loss and kind of, you know, and kind of trouble the idea of you know, sex as a drive. And I don't mean it in a psychoanalytic way, I mean it in like, in a much more, kind of, I don't know the term, but you know, like, I'm not talking about the Freudian drive, I'm talking about like this idea of like, although he does speak about it at first, in the first line, in fact, of the 3 essays, talks about the drive as like comparable to hunger and thirst and things like that, and it's that's not how it works. But and so like that has been misunderstood and misread. I think that there are things that I really, especially around like safety and dysphoria, and you know, I really want to be just like understanding that we are all at different stages of a process, and that like I'm not saying, you know, in critiquing the, you know, the prominence that we place on gender dysphoria, for example, or you know, in critiquing safety, I'm not saying that, you know, like you're wrong for using those expressions, you're wrong for using these terms and ideas. It's and that it's like, yeah, some people do feel that they were born in the wrong body, you know, some people do believe, do feel deeply that they've always known, like they're not always like me, you know, and it's like, well, you know, being a little shit and saying like, well, you know, when did you know? Well, I knew 5 minutes ago, but ask me in another 5 minutes, because like I'm in the process of changing my mind here. So I really want to bring this idea of like, I'm trying to challenge, I'm trying to push, and I'm also knowing that I don't have any kind of illusions over the fact that like, you know, the concept of dysphoria is going anywhere fast. I'm not saying it's crap, I'm saying let's think about how it is being used and what realities we are bringing in when we use it. Like, you know, the DSM-5, when it's talking about dysphoria, still talks about the strong desire for, you know, various things, you know, as if you have to be sure. You can't experience any ambivalence. My dear friend Doug Braun Harvey talks about ambivalence is essential to the change process. And I really want to hold on to that. Those are a couple of the things, and you know, I'm not trying to say that, you know, like also that you should just be taking all the risks all the time. Like we've had an experience in the last few days where it's coming up against a risk, and I was like, yeah, that's not a risk I want to take, and that's okay.
I mean, the book is, like, as we are about to open it up to the audience, I want to say the book is, like, you've made it very accessible, and it's also extremely erudite and well-researched, and like also addresses clinicians in a way that is not exclusionary of other audiences. And there's also like these exercises where you can experiment with these ideas for yourself, which I think is a really nice addition. Should we open it up to the audience?
And not so it becomes manualized though.
No, not
You know,
at all.
like that's something we were talking about in another context, you know, I don't want these things to be solidified and, you know, like this is how you do de-armoring, this is how you do solidarity. It's not, it's these are soft skills, and it's like maybe you feel it. I want you to feel it, not necessarily understand it. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so
This
much.
is amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for this book. It's a really important book. I'm very glad it's out. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
All right, have at it.
congratulations on the second edition. I'm really excited to read it.
Thank you.
And I'm since you did so much revising, and I love your description of the iterative process of the writing and thinking. Is there something you were desperately happy to get to take out?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally. My nesting partner is really good at calling me on my shit. And I really, it annoys the fuck out of me, and yet I really like it when she does it. And one of the things that she tells me is like, I can always tell when you're really nervous about something because you just surround it with all of this like armature, you know, and like you don't stand, you know, in your own self about it. And so like some of the things that I was really excited to take out was like, you know, there were some references to like, Esther Perel was such a bigger part of one chapter of the first edition. And it's like, I don't need this. I don't need this distinction anymore. It's fine. It doesn't go away, but like, I mean, the first edition's still there. And I'm not disavowing it, but it's I have a great affection for everything in the first edition. It's like my first child, you know. But I was so glad to be able to just like refocus in some areas, like and just like get to the essential of it. Also, like in the first edition, there was a safety critique, but it just wasn't. It didn't work. And I had this, instead of solidarity, it was this expression of boundedness. And, you know, of course, especially after your book, especially after reading Hatred of Sex, I'm thinking, oh shit, I'm binding the erotic. Shame on me. So better not do that. So I was really glad to kind of take some of that stuff out, and get maybe a little closer to something else. And I'm sure that if there's ever a third edition, you know, that I will probably, there's one chapter that I know that I'm going to go after next. You know, if I ever get the chance, but I just like I didn't in the first edition, in the second edition. Thanks for that question.
I mean, while we're waiting for people to gather their thoughts, what you just said about how after reading Hatred of Sex and SPC, you were like, okay, this doesn't work, and I want to take it out. Like that to me has kind of like one way to think about that for me is like a solidarity in writing. Like if we think of us as a community of authors who are also informed by each other and who are revising our work in relation to what everybody else is writing. That's like that seems like a kind of authorial community, solidarity, which is not afraid to rethink one's ideas, which I think is so much in keeping with the ethic of, okay, I'm gonna do it again, and that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I love, you know, like, I love these books. I love your book, you know, it's because it's like, oh damn, I've just been really called out on this one, you know, and I feel just like so exposed, and I really like that.
You know, the interesting thing is when you say, I want to clarify for people who may have not read the works yet, the calling out is also something that you bring to it.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, I am not saying, you know what, Lucy Fielding writes such and such, and that's a problem.
No.
Right? It is a willingness to see something in the text that you read as responding to something that you have put out there, or rather, it has a relationship to it. And that's a form of address that we are not, I mean, that's the ethic that you were talking about earlier, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
I think just to build off that and to give you an open playing field a little bit. Talk to us in applying what you were just saying, basically, into relationship, into community. Talk about risk and vulnerability. You've touched on this, but I think they're powerful. I want to hear where you take that.
Talking about invulnerability or vulnerability?
Risk and vulnerability.
Risk and vulnerability. I think about those moments of undressing in front of a lover for the first time. Or I should say I carry a lot of anxiety around my hair. It's a wig. And one of the most intimate things that I can do with someone is to remove my hair with them. And it's terrifying to me when I do it. For the first time, it's the amount of just internally I'm bracing, internally I'm feeling just oh God, what if I'm misplacing my trust, kind of thing. And I think about the risk of that, because it's definitely there, but then I have these experiences after that, I was with a dear friend when we were still dating, and we were driving somewhere, I think in LA, and I removed my hair with them, a while ago, and I was very comfortable with it. And part of the way that they de-armored me was that the de-armoring happened was that at one point they specifically asked me to remove my hair, and because they wanted to touch my head, and they wanted to and we had this moment, I think we're driving to the airport, and I was just we're about to part, and I don't want you to see me like this. I want you to know me as you do. And so I took off the wig in that moment, and the windows were down, and I realized that I was feeling the wind on my bare head for the first time in 10 years. And it was this really powerful moment that I could not have anticipated. I mean, it's just, but it's what can happen with the risk when you do that, and when somebody is engaging in that careful, slow, patient work of de-armoring with you. Did that feel responsive?
Yeah, I think so. I give you a very wide field.
Great. I love an open sandbox. Yes, please, thank you.
Yeah, if nobody else has a hand up right now, I'll push on that a little more. I think everything that's been talked about is relevant on both sides of the slash, so to speak, so far. But in power exchange, we take on different types of risk and different types of vulnerability. And I'm curious if anything comes up when we talk about it through that lens of when we're playing with power, when we're taking on different types of responsibility, how that affects the experience.
Mm. Um, take a second.
Can I say something?
Yeah,
while you're
please.
thinking? I was actually thinking with Lucy's example of the risk that is taken by the person who says, take off your hair.
Mm.
That's also a risk,
Mhm.
even though we don't usually think of that as a risk, because Lucy could feel offended, hurt, feeling like that's not the right moment. How could you say this to me now? Why didn't you say this 3 hours ago? Why would I trust you? I mean, there's so much could go. And those are the kinds of moments that could actually cast a very bad taste on an entire experience and rewrite however good of a day you may have had. So I think that your question about how risk is taken by both sides is really important, because we usually like to think of questions of safety and power as apportioned by positionality.
Mhm.
And that is just not the case, because part of the experience that you got to have on your head is also possible by the risk that this person is taking in saying, do this with me. And now that experience with a wind on your head is an experience that's also relational. It's not just a physical experience that you get to have. It's a physical experience that's also contextualized in the risk that the other person takes. So for me, like that moment where somebody asks and somebody says, okay, I'll take that risk with you, that's a moment of solidarity.
I mean, to kind of bring exigent sadism into the room for a second, you know, like, one of the things that I'm deeply passionate about in my personal life and that I've been writing is sadist for sadist dynamics, and the ways that that how interesting it is when, you know, you're thinking about like top, bottom, dominant, submissive, but you're, you know, it's almost who cares, because you're both, everyone involved in that scene or in that dynamic is really pushing against the other and relentlessly, I would hope, you know, I think about a scene that I did, and I was bottoming and it was for impact, and I was thinking about like, you know, I'm not a masochist. I don't actually like enjoy the pain. I'm a sadist who wants to push another sadist to be relentless with me. And so like there was a moment, you know, where like I'd seen and they were you know, hitting me, and then the whip came out, and I love whips. And you know, and because like the crying, I just descended into sobs at that moment. And that's when they stopped and they started like engaging in aftercare, and so they were extending care. And meanwhile, my own experience was, God, I wish you would waited another 5 minutes and actually kept going, like redoubled your efforts, like seen the tears and been like Richardson's Mr. B in Pamela, you know, and say like, you are most beautiful in your tears, and then like keep going, what do you have for me? What's going to happen now? And because I could feel that there was something that I wanted to scream out, but that never happened because the whipping stopped. I don't know.
I mean, I think that that's also about the top's risk, like tops not taking risks. And it's kind of like one of the most common complain from bottoms is like not going far enough. And one of the most common complaints from patients who kind of like come from leave a treatment and go into another is my previous therapist didn't push me enough. Not that anybody's grateful when they're pushed on treatment. Not that you get any thank yous for that.
And
but in
nor are we
real
doing them a
time.
favor.
Exactly,
You know?
exactly. So I think that what you were saying, like I also think about the kind of like, what does it mean to think of two sadists together? But two sadists here are not two people who are delivering sensation or two people who are kind of like play with cruelty, but two people who are both bending their will. And I think that that's a very different kind of intimacy.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I will take any and all opportunities to talk about sadist for sadist.
Thank you both so much. This is super generative and great. I'm gonna see if I can. I have many thoughts, so I'm gonna see if I can put it all together. I have questions about temporality and time. And the event is called Dreaming Trans Futures. And now listening to you all, I was thinking maybe it's doing trans presence. And I sometimes wonder if the futurity and the attachment we have to futurity also in trans theory always does us a favor, and whether it might not be helpful, especially now, to kind of focus really on the kind of trans presence and the living that is being done. So I was recently at I don't know, at the drag show, and one of the performers was like, okay, enough surviving, let's do living, to kind of, kind of switch that a little bit. And I think I love the way you talk about solidarity and the temporality in all the meanings of solidarity. And I guess I just want you to talk a little bit more about the ways you think about the relationship between presence and future, or the future in the presence, in that idea of solidarity.
Yeah, I mean, past, present, future. I want to, to call upon Munoz again, like I don't want to fall into into straight time and to talk about Munoz's expression is the here and now is a prison house. And yet, I also think there's a anti-Zionist expression that emerges from 19th century socialist movements, anti-Zionist Jewish movements, and it's a Yiddish word that means Doigkeit, and I actually have a tattoo of it right here, of the word, and I think about that's a very peculiar kind of present. Doigkeit means here-ness, and it's opposed to there-ness, which is it's the next year in Jerusalem kind of stuff, right? And instead it's no, the world to come is always already here. It's already here. We just have to reach for it. And so there is that constant play, and I think that there's something very queer and very trans about that play, where again, it's like queer lineage is queer futurity, is our relationship to the queer present or the trans present, and it's about solidarity. To me, is about being in movement with another, which is to say thinking across, thinking with, being with being across. There's a great Miller Oberman poem with which I end the Solidarity chapter, and it's on trans.
Do you want to read it?
Yeah, and this is I didn't intend to read from the book, but here we are. The process of through is ongoing, asserts Miller Oberman in his sublime poem on trans. As noted in the introductory chapter, trans is a Latin prefix that translates to on the other side of, or across, or beyond. Embedded in the word is a sense of movement, a process, a journey, a shifting of form and emergence. Given that it is a poem entitled On Trans, it feels only fitting that it would begin by defining its subject. For a word to include this prefix, and Oberman takes us on a tour of many of these words, both established and invented, in the body of the piece, is to hold at its core perpetual motion. And so, like its subject, the poem does not remain still and steeped in the definitional. It morphs. It is, like the poet's presence in the piece, transient, just going, just leaving, coming elsewhere. Transpiring during a shared moment of transitory intimacy between a T4T couple against the backdrop of a crackling fire, Oberman's poem is a meditation on transition and transformation. As in the practice of alchemy, fire is the mechanism through which transmutation takes place. At first, the locus of transformation is the wood in the hearth, as it transpired visibly, resin to spark, bark to stone, wood to ash. But that focus shifts to the poet himself in the final stanza, which I quote below in its entirety. I felt heat changing me. The word for this is trans desire. But in extreme cases, we call it transdire. Or when this heat becomes your maker, we say transire. Or when it happens in front of a hearth, transfire. And I think about that. I think about transfire, transdesire, happening in the midst of transdire, the anti-trans present. And how can we be in relation, be in solidarity, and be in a shared reverie together, where we are dreaming and enacting the futures that are always already here and that are just over the horizon and that have already been. Amber Hollabaugh I also think about Douglas Crimp's great essay, How to Be Promiscuous in an Epidemic. There's also, Amber Hollabaugh and talks about, like how ingenious queer and trans folks are, and that, we've been here before. We know how, no one will do it for us and no one will do it half as well, I think is Hollabaugh's line. Anyway, I hope that feels responsive.
This is a really nice line bringing us, I think, towards the end of our time today. Thank you so much. This has been really amazing. Thank you all for being here today. There are books in the back. You will sign?
Absolutely. I'll even put a lipstick kiss on it. I brought my lipstick.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Good night, online audience.